Okay, so Vayishma Yisro Chayan Midyan Chaysein Moshe Eis Kol Asher Asa Yisrael Moiri Asher Hitziloi Miyad Mitzrayim. Sorry, Es Kol Asher Asa Lekim LaMoshe LeYisrael Avdoi Asher Hitziloi Miyad Mitzrayim. Yisro, the priest of Midyan, the father-in-law of Moshe, heard everything Hashem had done for Moshe and the Jewish people, that he had saved them from Egypt. And of course, Moshe goes out of the camp to greet his father-in-law. He brings him in together with his own wife and his two children. He makes a big meal. He serves them at the meal. He tells Yisro everything that happened to them, all the miracles, and how Hashem had saved them. And Yisro says, Baruch Hashem, blessed be Hashem, Asher hitzilaschem miyad Mitzrayim miyad Pari, that saved you from Mitzrayim and miyad Pari. Ata yadaiti ki gadol Hashem mikol elohim. Now I know that the true God is greater than all the other gods. Ki badavar shazoru aleim, because he punished the Egyptians with the very thing that they tried to do to the Jews. He drowned them. They tried to drown the Jews. He drowned them. So Yisro said Baruch Hashem, basically, which is a very common refrain nowadays. How are you? Baruch Hashem. Blessed be Hashem. That's the thanksgiving to Hashem for whatever it might be. Although the best thing is, if somebody asks you, how are you, is not simply to say Baruch Hashem, but to thank Hashem for something. So if you're doing well, you say Baruch Hashem, I'm doing well. If you're not doing well, you say Baruch Hashem, terrible. Because you're supposed to bless Hashem for the good and for the bad. So there's nothing wrong with saying you're doing bad if that's the truth. But you bless Hashem anyway, because everything is ultimately for the best. Anyway, this idea of saying Baruch Hashem is no simple matter. The Gemara says, Genaihu LaMoshe v'shishim riboy, shalayamu Baruch ad sheba Yisro v'amar Baruch Hashem. It's a genai, it's a shanda, it's a disgrace that Moshe and the 600,000 Jews did not say Baruch, blessed are you, until Yisro came along and said it. Now we have to understand exactly first of all, what does Baruch mean? And what's so great that Yisro said Baruch? So in general, Baruch means blessed. You bless somebody, you give them a bracha, you give them a blessing. Now Hashem, quite frankly, does not need our blessing, because Hashem is the source of all blessings. There's nothing that you can say or do that will add to the greatness of Hashem. And that's why some of the commentaries translate Baruch not as we are blessing Hashem, but rather that we are recognizing that Hashem is blessed, and that Hashem is in fact the source of all blessings. Another meaning of Baruch is from the word brecha. In Hebrew, a pool is called a brecha. Brechat schia is a swimming pool. What does a pool have to do with a blessing? What we're saying is that Hashem is like a pool of blessings, like a source of water, like a pool is a source of water and you draw water from it. Hashem is like the source of all blessings from which we can draw blessings down here into this world. The word Baruch is also related to the word Berach. Who can translate Berach? Birkayim.
Kneel.
Knee, exactly. Birkayim are knees. And Berach, which is a knee, and what we're saying is that we are bowing, like we're bending our knee to Hashem. And in a similar terminology, it means to bring down, like your knees on the lower part of your body, and when you bow, you're lowering yourself. So when you say Baruch, you are drawing down the blessing from Hashem, Yud Kei Vav Kei, Hashem who is beyond time and space, Elokeinu who is our God, who gives us life, Melech HaOlam, who is the king of the world. We're drawing down that blessing all the way into Boirei Peri Ha'etz, how Hashem creates the fruit of the tree, or into the fruit of the ground if you're eating a vegetable, into the grains if you're eating mazonos, into the bread, the grapes, or into the whole world if you're saying Shahakol Nihiyah B'dvarai, everything was created through Hashem's word. You are drawing Hashem's blessing into the world every time you say a blessing. That's why the Gemara says that if a person does not say a blessing, he is stealing from Hashem, and he's stealing from the Jewish people. Now, we understand why you're stealing from Hashem, because until you say a blessing on something, you don't have permission to take it. So to speak, it belongs to Hashem. It is like Hashem's property, because everything Hashem created, he created to glorify him, and everything in the world glorifies him in some way. So who gives you the right to consume that item and take away that glory of Hashem? Well, if you glorify Hashem before eating that item, well, then you have fulfilled the very purpose of that item, and then you are allowed to eat it. So if you don't say the bracha, you're stealing from Hashem, that we understand. But how is it that you're stealing from the Jewish people if you don't say a bracha? It's my apple. I went to the store. I paid for it. Double what I paid for it a year ago, mind you. But I paid for it. And how am I stealing from anybody else if I don't say a bracha? Well, the answer is that when you say a bracha, you are drawing Hashem's presence and Hashem's blessing into the entire world. All of the trees, all of the vegetables, all of the grains, all of the wine products, and Shahakol Niyah B'dvarai, the most amazing bracha, everything was created with Hashem's word. And not just was created in the past, but in the present. You'll notice all of the brachas are in a tense that can be translated both as present and as past. Boirei can be translated as he created in the past. And this particular apple, of course, was created in the past. But it can also be translated as present tense. He is creating. Hashem is constantly creating the world. And when you say the bracha, you are bringing Hashem's energy into the world. God forbid a person who doesn't say a bracha is losing out on that opportunity to bring Hashem's energy into the world, to increase his blessing in the world, and therefore he is stealing that blessing from the Jewish people. In fact, the Gemara calls him a chaver leish mashchis. He is a friend of a destroyer. And the Gemara says that the destroyer refers to none other than Yeravam ben Nevat, the first king of the 10 tribes, who set up idols in the northern kingdom and prevented the Jews from worshiping Hashem, and instead insisted that they worship idols. Why is he a chaver leish mashchis, a friend of the destroyer, this Yeravam ben Nevat? Because Yeravam ben Nevat had the attitude that there's other powers besides Hashem. Yeah, Hashem is a big power, but, we got this little calf here. We could even make it speak. He set up magnets so it could move. So he believed in multiple powers. And a person who is not recognizing Hashem in this world is kind of saying, yeah, Hashem created it, but right now, currently, we have other powers that we have to pay homage to, and we can forget about the ultimate source. So in that sense, he is following the path of Yerovam. So therefore, we understand how important it is to say Baruch and an entire bracha when we say it. That being said, we still have a question. Why is it a genai? Why is it a disgrace that the Jewish people did not say this particular word when they did say very beautiful praises of Hashem? When they crossed the sea, they said, Az Yashem Moshe V'nei Yisrael, the Song of the Sea, a beautiful song, very poetic. We read it to this day, every day. The women sang as well. It's one of the 9 songs that are included in the Tanakh. And it's a wonderful song. So they didn't say the word Baruch. Okay. They said the word Shira, we will sing. Ashira la Hashem, we will sing to Hashem. And all the wonderful verses that they said in that song. So why is it that it's so significant that Yisro said Baruch Hashem? That's question number 1. Question number 2, the Zohar says that the arrival of Yisro was a key to the giving of the Torah. Had Yisro not come, maybe we wouldn't have got the Torah. Here's the words of the Zohar. Until Yisro came and praised Hashem, the Torah was not given to the Jewish people. When Yisro came and said, Baruch Hashem, etc., that elevated the honor of Hashem in all the worlds above and below, and then we got the Torah in a complete manner. So Yisro's arrival was no simple matter. It was a key piece in the puzzle that had to be put together before we could receive the Torah. So the question is, what's so significant? I mean, he was a good fellow. He brought up a wonderful daughter. He had a wonderful son-in-law. He gave Moshe very good advice to have many judges. His descendants, by the way, joined the Jewish people. They were the sons of the Canaanite, and they lived amongst Amalek. We read about one of his descendants in the Haftorah this past Shabbos. Her name was Yael, the wife of Hever HaKeni. She's the one who smashed the skull of the general of the Canaanites, Sisera, and enabled the Jewish people to win that battle decisively. So he had very significant descendants in terms of Jewish history. But nevertheless, why is it that the Torah could not be given until he came and said Baruch Hashem? Last question is that the Torah generally does not speak negatively about people unless there's a point to it. So why is it significant to mention that he was the Kohen in Midian? Now, some translate the Kohen as the leader, as kind of the officer. Kohen sometimes means an officer. Well, then we understand, because it's pointing out that he had power and he could have had a good life in Midian, and instead he gave it all up to come to the desert, the middle of nowhere. And that's a positive thing. But if you say that he was an idolatrous priest, why is it important to point out his past, the mistakes of his past? And now he worshipped other gods. The Medrash says he worshipped every god that there was to worship. That's not in the verse, but nevertheless, why is it important? Why do we have to speak negatively about him when we could just leave that point out? Okay, these are my questions, and I will take any ideas that you have before we forge on into the explanations. It's nice to have a full house, by the way. It's been a little bit empty recently. So maybe I should come late more often. Is that why you're all here? Because I was late? No, I'm just kidding.
Can you
Okay.
just run down the questions again?
Number one is, why does the Gemara say it was a disgrace for the Jews that none of them said Baruch Hashem until Yisro came? If the Jews said Az Yashir, which has many more words than Baruch Hashem, it probably has 50 times as much. And they're all words of praise. What is it about Baruch Hashem specifically that's so important? And question number two is, why does the Zohar say that Yisro had to come and say this in order for Hashem to give the Torah? Why is it so important that the giving of the Torah depends on it? And finally, why does the Torah have to point out that he was a galach, as they say in Yiddish, a priest? Okay, it's bad enough that he was. We have to mention that Yisro was a priest, that Moshe's father-in-law was a priest. It's bad enough that it happened, but keep the skeletons locked up in the closet, and that's it.
Can I try?
Yes, please.
I think that the answer to the first question is because he was the first one who admitted that, we have one God, that it's only one God. And it's kind of, especially from a person who in the past was actually had a completely different belief, who was actually praying to idols. That's it. This is, I think, is an important point. And I
That's
think
good. That's good. I think you're going to take over the class from now on, but go ahead.
no, that's fine. That's fine. And I believe that the reason why it was mentioned that he was a priest, because if a person so radically changed his opinion, it really is a really strong proof
Very
that
good.
he
Very
was a
good.
believer.
We're definitely getting in the right direction. Very good. Anybody else? Okay, so basically, I'll just continue from what Anna is saying, that King Solomon says, "V'ra'isi ani sheyesh Yisroin lechachma min hasichlus." I have seen that there is an addition, there is an advantage to wisdom over foolishness. You can understand this in two ways. You can understand that there's wisdom in this foolishness. Here they're like this, and wisdom is better. It's better. Okay, that's one understanding. Another understanding is yesh yisrain lechachma min hasichlus. There is an addition to wisdom that comes from foolishness. That means when you realize that the foolishness is foolishness, the more wisdom you get. Which in a way means that if you had more foolishness originally, and you recognize the folly in your foolishness, and you bring light into that darkness, that you actually achieve a greater light and a greater wisdom. Let's take Yisro, for example. We said that he was the idolatrous priest of Midian. Now, what were the idol-worshipping priests of those days? I'm talking about the high-class ones, not the ones who just made totem poles and banged drums around them, but the high-level priests. We have to realize these were people who were philosophers, who were deep intellectual thinkers, and they came to the conclusion that God was so great, is so great, so mighty, so powerful, that it's beneath him to get involved in dealing with worms and with bacteria and with, making babies and just seeds sprouting and winds blowing. And I mean, God he's out of this world. He's completely beyond this Narishkeit. So in order to glorify God, not in order to minimize God's greatness, on the contrary, in order to glorify God, they came to the conclusion that God must have set up minor powers, and he left the running of the world to them. Not that they were there originally. It's not that there was a conglomerate of different gods and they were fighting with each other like Jupiter and Zeus and all of those Greek mythology things. No, there was one God originally. And then in order to make the world run smoothly, he set up officers. And there's this angel, and there's that angel, and there's the other angel, and then each angel has their underlings, all the way down till the stars, and the sun, and the moon.
Bureaucrats.
Exactly, bureaucrats. And if you have a good connection to the bureaucrat, then you're even better off than if you have a good connection to the king. Because the king, he doesn't have time to deal with your permit for making your swimming pool. He's busy with what kings are busy with. But if you have the ear of the local, permit guy, or the local mayor, or whatever it might be, okay, then you can get your issue taken care of. So the different idolatrous priests recognized all of the different powers that exist in this world, and they worshiped them because they said God is beyond, he's aloof, he's removed. And when we say that Yisro was the priest, the top priest, that means he recognized not just the lower level intermediaries in his mind, but all the way till the top. He recognized all the angels that exist. Now we have to realize that these angels do exist. And of course, the stars and the sun and the moon do exist. And the advantage of the wisdom that comes from the foolishness is that he recognized all of these powers, yet he also recognized that these powers had and have none of their own power and might, but that they run the world only completely like conduits, like pipelines. Hashem sends the energy through them in order that the energy should be minimized and mitigated and concealed and reach us in small portions so that we can exist in the limited way that we do, but that in fact Hashem is the decision maker. There's nothing outside of Hashem. No decision comes from any intermediary, and therefore we don't worship or give honor or respect to any intermediary, only to Hashem himself. So this is a level. This is an acknowledgement, and that acknowledgement was something that was key to the receiving of the Torah. And this has to do with the famous medrash that the Lubavitcher Rebbe quoted, if I may say so myself, more often than any other medrash. It's the theme of so many of the Rebbe's talks. And that is that when the Torah was given to the Jewish people, it accomplished the fact that this lower realm could become a place of holiness. And that before the Torah was given, there was a chasm and a break between holiness and this world. And this world was not yet a receptacle. It didn't have the ability really to absorb holiness and be transformed. And that only became possible with the giving of the Torah. And that's why the mitzvahs beforehand were not of the same quality that we have nowadays. Nowadays, you make tefillin, you make a mezuzah, you make a Sefer Torah. These things become holy. They did not have such objects in the previous time before the giving of the Torah, because this physical world was too coarse and unelevated, impure, as a result of the sin of the tree of knowledge and so on. and it was not yet a place that was fit for this revelation. And that changed with the giving of the Torah. Now, in order for this change to happen, Yisro, who represented the awareness of all of the different aspects of this world, like I said, he was the Kohen of Midian. That means he knew all of the different levels that could be misinterpreted as having a separate power for Hashem. And specifically, he came to the recognition that there is only one God. That represents the idea of the transformation of every single aspect of the world, all the way down till the lowest of the low. Meaning to say, all of the mistakes that can be made, he was aware of those mistakes, and he brought the additional light into this world to overpower those mistakes. And that was the perfect preparation for what was about to happen with the giving of the Torah. This also, by the way, explains why Rashi says, Ma shmua shama uba. What did Yisro hear that made him come? And Rashi says, Kiryas Yamsuf u'melchemas Amalek, the splitting of the sea and the war of Amalek. What does he mean by that? Why specifically was it those events that made him decide to come into the desert? Why is the war of Amalek more significant than the exodus from Egypt, for example, than the 10 plagues, than the falling of the mun, than the well of Miriam? And also, why specifically these two things, the splitting of the sea and the war of Amalek? So here's what it is. When the sea split, it says that all of the oceans in the world split. All of the rivers split. All of the lakes split. And when people asked what's going on here, they were told, God is saving the Jewish people from the Egyptians. So this was like a big PR stunt that Hashem did, international, instantaneous. Everybody heard about it. That's why it says, Shamu amim yirgozun chil ochas yoshvi peloshas. The nations of the world heard this, and they trembled. Those that were living in the land of the Philistines were trembling. And Rus said, 40 years later, she was a professional woman of the night, and she said, Lekama oid ruach beish. Ever since the splitting of the sea, I have no customers. The men, they're so afraid. They have nothing, they have no manhood left because they're so afraid. So we're talking about a real fear that gripped the whole world as a result of the of the splitting of the sea. How is it possible that Amalek comes along and starts up with the Jews with such utter chutzpah, as if nothing happened? They also were aware of the splitting of the sea. Rachav, yes, definitely Rachav. Rus was not a woman of the night. Rus was a righteous woman, a woman of the day. Thank you. So the point is that this is the issue. The issue is that sometimes you see a miracle and you're so impressed and it's so wonderful and it's so amazing, but it doesn't change you internally. It's external. It's just like, wow, that's great. Next. And you go back to life. It's like people say, you know, if I had lived in the generation of the Exodus, I would be a believer. I would keep Shabbos. I would keep kosher. I would do everything. But here I am, and I don't see miracles. And what does God want from me? If I would see miracles, then I would believe and I would observe. Well, I have news for you. The Jews in the time of the desert saw miracles, yet they rebelled very often. And many of us do see miracles in our own lives in different ways when we need God's salvation, and He saves. And sometimes we remember, and sometimes we forget. I went last week to be Menachem Avel, a friend of mine in New York. And I went together with another friend of mine who used to organize birthright trips. And we went to the Ohel. And there was a fellow there who recognized him and said, "Hey, Steve, I'm so-and-so from your birthright trip." And he said, "Okay, nice to see you." I mean, he took like hundreds, if not thousands of kids on these trips. So whatever, he said, no, I'm the one who you left at the Kosel. Don't you remember me? And he said, "Oh yeah, of course I remember you." What happened was this kid was on a birthright trip. They had 2 hours to be in the old city, and then they had to go back to the airport, and all the flights were taking off back to wherever they were from in America. And this kid is sitting on the bus like 2 minutes before the bus is supposed to leave. And he says, "Wait, I didn't put on tefillin yet at the Koisel. I have to run to the wall to put on tefillin." And Steve, who's like running the trip, says, "What do you mean you can't go? This is like, everybody's gonna miss their flight because of you." And he went anyway, and the buses left. And he said he put on tefillin, and he turned around and he saw that the buses left. And he had no cell phone. He had no money. He didn't know anybody. He went over to the Chabad guy who had the tefillin stand, and he said, "Hey, you think I could sleep at your place tonight? Because like I really don't know where I'm gonna be." And the guy was like, "Yeah, for sure, no problem." Anyway, he said that he turned to Hashem and he said, "If you save me from this, I'm gonna become religious." And within 10 minutes, he was saved. I didn't get exactly the details, but his sister was on the bus, and his sister sent somebody, and that person ended up becoming his brother-in-law. He married that person's sister. He became religious, and he's a lawyer in Flatbush. He's like a straight, like normal guy, but a religious guy. And that's from, Hashem just arranged things just so. He should be in trouble. He should call out. Hashem should save. And there he is. So there's an example of a person who did not forget that miracle and lives with it on a daily basis. But it can happen that we have miracles and we don't change. And that's what it was with Amalek. They saw the miracle, but it was like water off a duck's back. Yeah, so what? Hashem is great, but that's not going to stop me from being me. And that's why Yisro felt it was essential that he should come, because he saw that the miracles weren't penetrating, that there was no internal change within the world. And therefore he felt that as the Kohen of Midian, as the priest, idolatrous priest of Midian, he had to come and join the Jewish people and bring with him his knowledge of the evils of the world and transform that knowledge into holiness and bring holiness into all those areas of knowledge and all those mistakes and correct all of those mistakes. And that's why the Zohar says that it's essential that Yisro should come and join the Jewish people in order for the Torah to be given. And that's why it's considered a genai. It's a disgrace that the Jews didn't say Baruch Hashem. I'm not still clear on that because they didn't have Yisro's knowledge of that, of those evils. So how could they have said it? Let me see. Just give me a moment. Yeah, the point is, even though they couldn't have said it, they couldn't have said Baruch Hashem the way Yisro did. Only Yisro had that ability to say it, because he was the one who had the darkness, and he was the one who could bring the darkness and transform it into light. The point is, the Genai is the disgrace that it wasn't being done. It wasn't a specific disgrace of any specific Jew, but there was a disgrace in the world. The world was not fixed. The world was in a state of disgrace over the fact that Hashem's awareness hadn't reached every part of it until Yisro said Baruch Hashem and fixed that disgrace. Okay, my friends, it's been a pleasure.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
It's
I
just
think Eliezer, Ebed Abraham, did a variation on Baruch Hashem. It was not quite. Something Baruch Hashem Elokei Abraham.
Yes, that's true. That's true. That's a good point. There is a similar expression. So we have to look at that Gemara. So maybe it doesn't mean the first one that said it in general, but the first one of that generation that said it. I have to look into that. Very good. Yasher
Sei
Koach.
gesund. Have a great Shabbos. Thank you.
thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
See
you.
you
You
again.
too. Thank you very
Be
much.
well. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.